Welcome to the Enabling Education Network podcast series, Inclusive Education, Unheard Stories. I'm your host, Ayman Qwaider. In this series, we hear from education stakeholders living and working in context where learners experience exclusion, marginalization, and oppression. Our guests highlight the challenges learners face and share ideas for how to achieve inclusive and empowering education for everyone. I spoke recently with Aubrey Moono from Zambia. Aubrey is a teacher, trainer, and a lecturer in art and design. He's been facilitating a training on inclusive education for several years and has trained college and university lecturers on inclusion in both Zambia and Ethiopia. Aubrey, welcome to the Unheard Story. Maybe just before I dive into this more technical question, if you can tell us a little bit about introduce yourself to the network and to the podcast, and tell us a little bit about your journey before we dive into the question.
My name, as you just rightly stated, is Aubrey Moono. I know you guys you call me Moono, but I'm Moono. That's how we pronounce it here. So I've been working now for about 26 years as a teacher, and I've also worked as a teacher trainer for 13 years. Regarding inclusive education, I think I've worked since the year 2015 to date, almost 9 years now. And I think I've done a lot in inclusive education. We, together with working with NAD, the Norwegian Association for the Disabled, as well as a consultant with EENET. So like you put it, I've trained a number of lecturers in universities and colleges here in Zambia, as well as in Ethiopia. So the journey has been so great, learning together with others in inclusive education. Sure, I think that's what I can say for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aubrey. I'm really glad to have this podcast with you. And let me now ask you as introductory phase for this podcast. There are many things that we could discuss regarding the inclusive education and your wide range of experience. But I would like us to focus on the connections between inclusive, quality education for all and the global climate crisis. And in this world of development funding, education projects and climate projects are often kept in separate boxes. But we know in reality these issues cannot be separated. They are intersected. So for us to kick off the discussion in this podcast, I would be very interested to hear your summary of the connection between the inclusive education and our environment and climate issues. How are these issues are connected, Aubrey?
Sure, they are very connected, very, very connected in the sense that whatever happens out there in the environment around us affects the learners in many ways. Take, for instance, here in Zambia and maybe much of the Southern African countries, we've had the drought situation that has created a great impact on the learning of the children in schools, in the sense that families have gone hungry because they could not harvest from their crop that was planted. As you may know, that our staple food in Zambia is corn or maize, And when we do not have maize, it means there is hunger in the home, because that's the food that we eat like 2-3 times a day. And so without it, surely it affects the families, it affects the learners. And so without food, learners may not come to school. Without food, learners may be part of the family that goes out to look for food. And if they are going out to look for food, it means they are missing out in school. And so you can see that there is a greater connection between what happens out there in terms of the weather patterns, how much rain that we receive, whatever happens out there generally affects the school system as well. So Zambia has not been spared. With an example of the environmental change in terms of lack of rainfall, it has made homes to go hungry, and because they are hungry, their children cannot go to school. The teachers may not come to school because they too have to go out and look for food. So there is that greater connection between the two.
That's a great elaboration between the intersectionality of the climate change crisis and the impact that it has on families of learners, the learners themselves, and which eventually impact badly the accessibility to education. Thanks so much, Aubrey. If I can, or I get you to reflect more on your work as a teacher trainer, can you tell us a little bit how and why our climate issues are relevant to your work and the teachers that you work with?
Sure. The climate change surely affects me and many others in many ways. I have students, like at the place where I work, all the students that we have here, they lodge at school. They are boarders, so to say. They come here and they stay in the campus like for 3 months, and then they'll have to go back home for a month, come back again for 3 months, they go back home for a month, and so they have like 3 terms in the year. And so their coming also is affected here because most families that surround the institution are farming families. Now, with the climate change that we are talking about, almost all families are affected by it because they get their finances from the farming that they do. And so that is the money they use also to sponsor their children, who are the young teachers that we have here to come to school. And if they cannot come on time, it means their education path is being affected. And since we are producing teachers, I don't see us producing quality or effective teachers who do not attend probably 100% of the time that we need them to be here because of the financial challenges that their parents are facing. So this climate change actually has a very great ripple effect to the extent that it affects us also as trainers, because we want to teach these students, but they are not there in time to be taught. And sometimes we have to lose like 2-3 weeks of waiting to have the students come, for them to get the money to come here. But it's understood because their parents, their only source of income is through farming. And if farming is affected, then we too are affected. The students are affected in many ways. Some of them even resort to cutting down of trees, in order to make charcoal for sale. And if they did that, imagine everyone is doing that, it means we are cutting down trees and increasing further the risk of not having good rains each season, because we cut down the trees. And as you may know, that trees are very important in the provision of rainfall. And my country here, we depend almost 95% of the farming that we do is dependent on rainwater, the natural rainwater. So if we don't receive the natural rainwater, it means farming is equally affected. This is what has just happened, because maybe less than 5% is irrigated crop. The rest of the crop is fed by rain. Without rain, it means we are affected. So even us as trainers, as teachers, as lecturers here, it affects us because our students are not attending as regular as we may have wanted them to. And so we know that this in the long run is going to affect the quality of teachers that we produce for the country. So it is a big problem. Raising money through charcoal is not sustainable because, again, it adds to the already problem that we have. So happily, my government, our government here, has already started now talking into changing the system of farming into irrigation. But that alone entails more dams to be constructed, more boreholes to be sunk, so that people can have water to do the irrigation. We were happy, all these years because we never had droughts. But now here we are faced with the droughts, meaning we have to change the way we do things.
Thanks so much, Aubrey. That's really good illustration on how lack of resources and the parents and families and community, kind of cut the trees basically to feed their own families, and how that really impacted climate change that is in fact impacting the learning environment. Just a question around how long has this situation been like, and what is the outlook?
Well, of late, I think in the recent 5 to 10 years, we haven't been receiving good rains. I remember when I was growing up myself, we never worried of whether we'll have rain or what. We just planted the maize and it all sprouted and we harvested. But this time around, in the past 10 years, I think there could be like 3-4 seasons that have not been good, whereby you have some harvesting while others not harvesting, the crop reaching in some areas. But this year and maybe the last year, especially this season, I think none of the farmers can claim to have harvested anything unless they were irrigating. So it shows how worse it is becoming as we move on, which I believe is due to the effects of man. Whatever man is doing to the environment, it is now showing after this long term. And the population is increasing. There's more demand, for the use of charcoal, for the use of firewood, for construction and everything else. And so it means more resources are being, needed for man use, because man requires all these huge amount of resources. The destruction is equally huge, and because it is huge, we see that now even the impact is becoming more and more on the climate, such that this time around it may not just be our actions here. Probably world over the actions are the same, but the effect has landed on us. We have the El Nino effect, which has gravely affected the southern part of Africa, not just Zambia. I know the other countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, they are all complaining about the El Nino effect. So it's because of our actions. And I know without any stoppage, this will continue, and it will continue affecting us even in the education sector.
Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of climate change, climate crisis on learners, teachers, parents, families, from your experience?
Yeah. Just near my workplace, we have a primary school, which I think I can walk to, and many times I've gone there just to see what is happening. And because of the hunger situation that is in the surrounding areas, children had stopped coming to school. My wife is a teacher there, and she tells me the daily attendance actually had gone so low until the government put in an intervention of feeding program. So this alone has a grave impact on the learners. Children are not coming to school. Even when under this new government, children were brought from out of school, children were brought into the schools. Many schools are flooded now because children that are dropped out, they have been allowed to come back to school because they are not paying anything in primary school and secondary school. So all of a sudden there was a huge enrollment. But because of the hunger, again we see that children have stopped coming to school. So this has an effect on us as teachers. It has an effect on the education system, because even when the government had put in place, modalities to make sure that all children are found in school, all children come to school without payment, they came to school. But here is another problem. They are hungry. How can they stay in school? So because of that, the enrollment again went down. But there is a new development. The government, after pronouncing and admitting that the country is in dire need of food because of the El Nino effect, there is some corn that is provided in the schools. And then teachers prepare this food to make sure that children have something to eat at school. And because of this, again, the number has risen up. Children are now coming to school because that could be the only place where they can find food. They may not have food at home, but if they are sure that every day they will have some, it's just dry corn which is boiled, children take that. And I'm told even if it's not prepared in time, they'll always wait for it before they get back home. So they will have to eat before they go home. So that alone is making them come to school on a daily basis. So in areas where this program is not running, for sure the attendance has reduced drastically.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And it elaborates a lot on the intersectionality of other services to education, nutrition, health, and how that is linked to education and how the overall is impacted by climate change. Let's dive deep into the topic of inclusive education. Zambia's long-term ambitions for inclusive education undoubtedly can be influenced by the climate change, and the environmental factors actually can significantly affect the realization of these ambitions for inclusive learning environment. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of climate change having on Zambia long-term ambitions for inclusive education?
Sure. When we train in schools, we talk about inclusive education as being education for all and ensuring that learners have access, learners can participate, and learners are going to achieve. So this has been the message. And out of the many modules that we have looked at, there is one module again which talks about, bringing out of school children into school. So meaning you are bringing all those children that had stopped due to various reasons, you bring them back to school. This government has helped us to bring all the children back to school because they have scrapped off all the fees in primary and secondary schools. They're just learning absolutely for free for the past 2 years now. And it resonated so well with the message that we have under inclusive education, that everyone must learn. And if they are to learn, they need to participate. But how can they participate on a hungry stomach? They need to have access. They need to access educational facilities. How can they go to a school where they know they will not find any food? So this has been a drawback on the message that we've been preaching. And happily for me, this government actually has selected places where the hunger is so high, where this hunger has hit so hard, and those schools, they are being provided with corn. It's just corn. Some schools with money, they're able to improve the corn and maybe add some peanut to it, or make some porridge out of it. But mainly they'll just boil it and children will just eat that food. So because of that, for me, in places where the government has done it that way, they are considering our message in inclusion that everyone must come to school. There shouldn't be any barriers that should stop learners from coming to school. Here now we are talking about the climate effects. It has become a barrier. And a good government is supposed to think of how to address this barrier so that children continue coming to school. And when they are in school and when they are not hungry, we are sure that they are going to participate and achieve at the end of it all.
Thanks so much, Aubrey. I wanted to ask you about what do you think of any inclusion-focused initiatives in your context, and how it can be delayed or lost because of the current situation of crisis and emergency situation. We know very well that how, policy, for example, during the time of emergencies and crisis can change, can shift, away from long-term goals to shorter-term goals. There would, for example, another issue would be around capacity constraint, data collection, monitoring, etc., etc. How is the situation? How the inclusion-related activities, initiatives can actually be delayed and lost because of this climate change?
Sure, I think we anticipate that in the sense that the government is already, making adjustments to the budgets, because of this climate change effect. There are so many changes that they are making. Like you rightly put it, monitoring will be one thing that may be affected because it requires the inspectors, the monitors to move from one place to another in order to see to it that inclusion is being realized. Without which, without money, we do not know what is going on. We need to monitor and evaluate the progress that we are making in inclusion. Now, without monies, without resources, all this now would mean getting back to the old ways of doing things. The government is making all these measures to save money in order maybe to provide more food to the hungry, to get into irrigation and what we call winter maize. This time around we don't plant maize, but the government now is putting money to encourage farmers to plant the maize this time around, which is not the planting season, of course. And so for the farmers to grow that maize, they will need to irrigate. So if they have to irrigate the crop, it means the government has to spend more money to sink boreholes and put dams. And so that money may be drawn from the educational activities, and being put into these immediate measures that have to be taken. They may be short-term or long-term, but the government is now diverting the money. And the minister was just talking about very soon presenting the new changes to the budget to Parliament so that they can help mitigate the effects of this climate change to the country. And I just wish that the government will also have education in mind, to make sure that education is considered. Even as they make all these changes, education should be part of what they consider not to be lost. Otherwise, we are bound to lose so much. And I'm happy, like I said, the feeding program, I think, is one response to the out-of-school learners to continue coming and maybe finding food when they are in school, even as they learn and as they participate. So much could be lost, and I'm just eager to hear what changes will be made as the minister presents his new budget to Parliament.
It'll be interesting to hear how the situation is going to unfold, and if there would be any solution emerging from this budget reform that could really reinforce the education and go forward.
Maybe just to add on,
Yes,
one other thing that the government has been doing is to buy. They are providing more desks like chairs and tables in schools, because most schools children were sitting like on the floor and stuff. So the target for the government was like, by the end of this year, no child should sit on the floor. So that is a very good inclusive strategy to make sure that every learner sits on the desk. But we know with all these changes now, with trying to mitigate the hunger situation, certain ambitions may not be attained. But we want to, we keep our fingers crossed that this may not be put on the side, but it continues along with the new additions to the budget.
Thanks, Aubrey. The next question is about those who are most marginalized in our community. We know that in a situation of a crisis and emergency, these marginalized become even at extra risk of being marginalized from education. They would be struggling to access education, whether they are learners with disabilities, IDPs, refugees, and those who are identified the most vulnerable and marginalized in our communities. Can I ask you, please, how does the current situation affect learners who are already marginalized or at risk of being marginalized in education in your context?
In our country, we have the program where government provides what they call the social cash transfer. They provide monies to some identified vulnerable families, families that may not be able to fend for themselves. So the government, through the Ministry of Community Development, has identified especially the elderly, who also keep maybe orphans, children with disability. And so the government has identified, but not all of them, of course, a few have been identified. And because of that, the government gives some grant like every month, some fund every month to such families, just to get the basic, stuff for their home use. But again, we know that may not be enough, especially where they have children that go to like tertiary institutions where there's this payment, tuition fees and all that. It's not enough.
Thanks so much, Aubrey. I'm actually interested to hear about how educators are responding to the impact of climate change on education. And I'm sure they are doing many different various ways possibly to adapt their practices to address the challenges that are actually emerging from this environmental and climate disaster. Can you tell us a little bit how educators like you, your colleagues on the ground, are actually responding to the climate change and its impact on education?
Well, this climate change, I think, is affecting everyone, including ourselves. Much as we are working, we are equally affected, in the sense that, like 2 months ago, we had a very big challenge where the staple food was not available. We had to scout from one place to another to look for this staple food, because this is what family members eat. My family eats, so everyone else eats. So if it's not there, then it becomes a challenge even on my part. I do not concentrate working if my family is lacking the basic food. So I have to go out and look for food first before I can do my work. This affects the way we operate as individuals, especially if the responsibility is solely on me to go and look for food. So I have to take care of my family even as I attend to my workplace. So this has affected many other workers, not only teachers, not only trainers, but any worker was equally affected. But like I've put it clearly to say, this government, I think, has been proactive. They have done everything that they could to make sure that everybody can get the food. And this time around, the staple food has been flooded everywhere, and the price, government price, is always very low compared to other private institutions that are selling this food. And because of that, it has helped so many families, including ourselves, to concentrate on the work that we are supposed to do, and not to worry much of where you are going to, or where and when you are going to get the food stuff for your family. So it has impacted us it impacted us negatively, but we are coping through because of what this government is doing to make sure that the impact is not so big, both on families and even the students that we have here. The government has also provided grants to institutions such as ours, where we have students that live on campus, so that more food can be bought for them, for their survival, even as they learn here, even as they attend to their academic work. So I think for us as teachers, I can safely say at the moment we are better off than it were 2 months ago, and we are able to concentrate on what we do. We are able to attend to our lectures, to our classes, and our students are able to attend, because everyone else now, I think the situation is kind of normalizing, but not, of course, not as it were in the past years. But we know that things are tough, but the way the government is doing things, I think, is making it easier for everyone to operate and be able to achieve in whatever we are doing.
Oh, it's great to hear about the government initiative in this regard. And I really would like to ask you about the other actors in the country, like the non-governmental organizations, other NGOs, how their support actually intersect with the support that the government and the effort that the government are doing and undertaking various initiatives to address the impact of climate change in education. Are you able to briefly just tell us a little bit about like what the NGO and the community action are doing in relation to this climate change and its impact on education?
Sure. Just yesterday I was listening to news. Actually, it was on TV, where one NGO, I think in the eastern part of Zambia, was encouraging farmers to go into winter maize to go into planting this time around. Meanwhile, we always plant around November because that's when we have the rains, November, December, January, February, March, I think up to early April. That's when we are supposed to, that's when we do plant our corn, our maize, our fields. They are all green that time. But this time around, it's dry, there's no rain, and it's always brown and dry. And now this NGO is encouraging farmers to plant now and irrigate the crop. So they are giving the seed for free, they are giving fertilizers for free, and so they are encouraging families to go into farming this time around and produce more food. So I've seen many other NGOs actually coming on board. Some are providing the relief maize. They just go into an area and give out the maize. Some of them are giving to government so that it can distribute to places, areas of need. But I know if someone doesn't think of education, the learners actually still are left out. But I think unless we put deliberate measures that are targeted to the learners themselves, to the schools, that's when we shall see the impact in education. Otherwise, most help, it comes to generally families. We know the learners are coming from families, but it would do more if it is directed to the schools, to the institutions that are dealing with, learners directly. I think there will be more impact that way. And I hope to see one NGO that is going to do that in my area here. I've seen government interventions in the schools, but I've not seen much of NGO interventions in the schools or even in my institution. So I'm yet to see one that is going to come on board to make sure that the students that we have here have a better living even as we undergo this crisis in the country.
I wanted to hear from you about the home-based learning. We know during COVID, for example, that the global pandemic, other crises and emergency context where local education authorities have to rely on home-based learning to ensure continuity of education. And I would like to hear from you about some modalities, or is there an effective support to home-based learning in Zambia during this climate-related crisis?
Well, currently there isn't, but I remember during the COVID times we did that, and government also came up to do that, because schools have not closed. Schools are still open. Because the schools are open, there's no other program that is put for home learning. But during COVID times, because the schools were closed, there were radio programs, there were TV programs where teachers were teaching and the children were expected to learn from home. And I remember as EENET, we also had the home learning booklets, which I distributed, I think, in Livingstone, Zimba, and Kazungula. And that was a great, I think, intervention that EENET put in place. I think for me it was even much more effective than the TV and the radio teachings that I was seeing, because from the evaluation that we made, parents were even claiming they were equally learning from the booklets. Certain things that they never knew, certain things that they could not do, they were able to do them. Parents were even able to teach their own children. They were not teachers, because the booklets were simplified, easy to understand, and easy to use, but it's still very effective. I watched when TV lessons were going on, the radio lessons were going on. My children never were interested. They were not interested. I think it was something boring for them. The way it was happening compared to what happens in their classrooms, this became very difficult for them to follow through. So anyway, coming back to this time around, at the moment, there are no interventions that have been put for children that may not go to school, such that they can learn from home, simply because I know schools have not been closed, and when they are closed for any pandemic, usually they are all closed at the same time, and then they reopen. But the government has not put in place anything at the moment with regards to the effects of climate change for children that may wish not to go to school or may fail to go to school, so that they can learn from home. So that has not been put in place at the moment.
Thanks very much, Aubrey. And I would like to take this opportunity also to highlight the invaluable home learning resource that the Enabling Education EENET has put together. This project, home learning project, provides some kind of short guidance, resources for parents, caregivers, and families of children with and without disabilities, basically, to ensure the continuity of learning in their own homes. And this project highlights that home learning should not attempt to replicate school at home, but also give parents, caregivers, family members, opportunity not to feel under pressure, basically to be like teacher, because we're not expecting them to be trained teacher, especially at the time of crisis and emergencies. So these resources are the home learning resources are available on the EENET website, and we would be providing link to these resources for people to check. And I'm glad to hear that they have been used in Zambia and Zanzibar during COVID situation, and they're still applicable in various contexts and a crisis situation. Aubrey, I would like to also to ask you, what is, from your perspective, needed to ensure that Zambia children don't lose much more education time? What can be done, okay, from your perspective, as an educator, as an inclusive educator in Zambia, that we ensure that no more children lose education?
Well, I think from my observation and from what I can say now, in schools where the feeding program is conducted, the enrollment is always very high, especially in the poor communities. When there's a feeding program in the school, children never miss school. So if we are going to teach children, we need to have children at our disposal. We need them to come to school. If they're not going to come to school, we are not going to teach them, and it will be difficult to teach them. So in order for us to teach them, I think the feeding program must be promoted in almost all the schools. So already it tells us, even in times when we do not have effects such as the hunger situation we have now, just a mere snack, I think, is important for the child, and it motivates the child to come to school, especially if they do not have what to carry for their recess, for their break, as a snack. That becomes a snack for the children, and for a child that is a big thing, just to have something to chew during recess. I think it's a motivation enough. Where there's no feeding program, a child will decide whether to go to school or not, and if they stayed home, sometimes they feel they have the opportunity to go out there and look for food. For me, I think what needs to be changed is to make sure that access is put as number one. What do we do in order to have children come to school, to access school? Their presence is very important. whether at primary, secondary school, or tertiary, a learner must first come to the school. Once they're in school, then it becomes easier for us, to attend to them. So I feel that is what can be done in order to include everyone in the school system.
My last question to you, Aubrey, today, and I'm so grateful for this insightful presentation and contribution, and taking us like showing us the actual reality of education on the ground in Zambia. If you are assigned to be the inclusive education minister in Zambia now, can I ask you what you would be, and you've already touched upon that, what can you do, and what you would be, proposing to your cabinet to basically ensure that valuable inclusive education process is not lost during the this current drought?
I was just reading about trying to find out about policies that we have in the education sector. I think an hour ago or so, I was just reading about, just wanted, very curious to see how clear is the policy on inclusive education. And so I realized that the policy is not so clear because it is more about Disability Act that we are talking about. Because it's about disability and not inclusion in general as we understand it now. So as a minister, I think I would work on the policy so that it's clear. Once it's clear, everything is going to fall through and follow through whatever is supposed to be done under inclusion.
Thank you very much. Really valuable perspective on these important issues of the intersectionality of climate change and inclusive education. Your willingness actually to support and to provide that experience, not only the knowledge but also the actual experience, really helped us to raise awareness around the issues and the challenges that facing inclusive education in the context of Zambia. And I really cheer you for being that advocate for inclusive education, and your commitment to advocate for the right of learners to continue access and receive quality education, despite all the challenges that you face in your context. So again, thank you so much for your thoughtful participation, and thanks for being a champion to inclusive education. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If you would like to know more about EENET's work, please visit our website www.EENET.org.uk. You can access almost 1,000 free resources on a wide range of topics related to inclusive education globally. EENET, the Enabling Education Network, has been working since 1997 to help document and share experiences of equality, inclusive education in low and middle income contexts. We encourage critical reflection and support efforts to challenge the norms and expectations. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@eenet.org.uk or WhatsApp us on 44749 4110 655.